Welcome to the Kresge 813 podcast. I'm Gabriel Sanchez. I'm joined here today with
Aaron Steinberg,
Julio Flores,
Benjamin Joseph.
this episode of the podcast. We're going to discuss systemic racism in America.
All right. I posed this question to everyone. What examples from recent history that you think of from the top of your head accentuate systemic racism, and how are they still impacting certain groups today? And a follow-up question, how has the U.S. government either propelled this or been involved with this?
Okay, well, the first thing that comes to mind would be the Reagan's war on drugs and how it disproportionately affected the black community and led to a large majority of the black community behind bars for drug charges that, in my opinion, were unfair. So that would be like a direct example of the government enforcing this kind of systemic racism on a whole community.
Following on that, we could also you could also look at the police force around just in the United States in general, as pointed out by Ta-Nehisi Coates in his book Between the World and Me. He points directly to how the cops in the United States target they just target black people, and yeah. You have anything to add to that?
Just a statistic that I saw the other day that really kind of blew my mind was that in this country, 77% of the population is white, and they control 90% of the wealth in this country, whereas 13% of the population is African American, and they only hold about 2.6% of the wealth.
Well, what can you attribute that to?
Systemic racism.
Systemic idea of racism in the corporate world in America, which is pretty synonymous with just the world of America, right? So what comes to my mind, if you remember, it was a couple of years back, maybe like a year and a half ago, there was that Starbucks incident where two African American men were arrested in Philadelphia. And they weren't doing anything, but I think like the managers of the store or something called the police, and there's a big scene. Anyway, after that, Starbucks rectified the situation, or quote unquote rectified the situation, by putting every employee through an anti-bias training. And
I remember that.
And so basically, 175,000 employees at all 8,000 locations in America were all at computers learning about the power of unconscious brains and the roots of unconscious bias. But in reality, they weren't really learning much. It was just kind of an image for the company, because they're well aware that that's not, like, education isn't the only thing that can change it. It's a change of mindset. So instead of really going to the roots and trying to solve the problem, they're just trying to like highlight that it's there, which I guess could be a step. But as a company, Starbucks just tried to fix their image.
Save face.
Yeah, save face. And that's part of the problems we have in the corporate world. Everything's about image. These ads, ads in our world are now like purposefully filled with different races, not like for a marketing point. It's not to show multiculturalism because of different benefits. It's literally purely just a targeted revenue type of thing. Like, and to me that just adds to like the racism problem in our country. Like it's changing for sure, especially in the corporate world. And I think advertising is a big problem. Do you guys have any ideas about that?
No, but you're right. Like in advertisements, like nowadays they are changing. You see like more diverse like people like on billboards or like people of color. But before, like it was strictly like the
Mainly white people
white
being
people.
advertised.
Yeah, because that's what like they would see as like not necessarily perfect, but like more attractive, and and it's changed nowadays, but you know, it's still like majority like white people.
But I think it's changing for the wrong reasons. I don't think these companies are trying.
Oh yeah, they're just doing it like to save face.
Yeah, to save face, and that's a problem.
They're trying. Well, they're a for-profit business. They're just trying to make money.
Yeah.
Kind of the same reason we had to do that diversity orientation online.
Yeah, like the school was just trying to not be responsible for the actions of some people, saying, "Oh, we told them not to be racist."
Yeah, they had to look at this PowerPoint. They're good, you know.
Yeah. Same thing with like you guys remember like the Title IX, the sexual assault thing, like. People that are that malicious probably won't learn much from a course like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, it's just for the liability of the school. So, there's issues like that, and our attempts to solve them are the bare minimum amounts of effort. It's all about personal liability and not about actually tackling problems. And I think it's just, it's completely parallels systemic racism in our country and what we do about it. So, now, moving into the next question, who is on the other side? Who actually benefits from the systemic racism system? Because I'd love to hear all your thoughts.
Well, definitely the people not being oppressed. So, in this case,
people in power.
People in power, people in government, rich people running companies, the mega rich benefit.
The people in power that want to keep their power and they want to keep the powerless.
Yes.
They don't want them to rise up and take and challenge their position of power.
Exactly. Like a group, like let's say, for example, the civil rights movement. The government was empowered back then to stop minority groups from rising up and changing the status quo. So they tried to shut down the Black Panther Party through FBI and CIA operations, and it's just again a classic example of the rich oppressing the not rich, keeping them down so they stay rich and they stay powerful where they are. For a different topic, I wanted to pose a question to Julio. Have you ever felt that being the skin color you are, has that put you at a disadvantage in America? Or have you ever felt oppressed or unfairly treated due to your skin color?
Coming from an area that's predominantly I would say 90% Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
I've never actually felt like as an outsider or a minority in a sense, even though I've always known I've been in the grand scheme of things. But in my area, until I came here to university, it was a culture shock for me, and I finally do feel as as a minority. But I don't. There's people like me in my same situation as me that grew up in predominantly white areas, and their whole life they've felt discriminated against, or as they're always taking a step behind.
I grew up in a pretty predominantly white neighborhood.
How did you feel about it?
Definitely felt like an outsider. I hanged out with a lot of white friends, and I was the Mexican of the group, even though I'm not Mexican. So, definitely puts you on the outside just for being a different skin color from others. Just being different, of course, but in terms of harsh racism, I never really felt that. My friends were still pretty sensitive or not racist. Yeah.
How about you, Aaron and Ben, being Caucasian males? How do you guys see anything from the other side of the coin?
I grew up in a town called Ojai, which there's a vast diversity and wealth. About 50% of our town is Latino. The other 50% is white, and just in the kind of areas of our town, there is definitely separation. A lot of the Latino population has been pushed kind of to the outskirts of town, and they live in more rural areas, where the downtown portion of my town is predominantly white.
I grew up near the San Fernando Valley, and it's a very, very diverse area. It's huge, and every little neighborhood you go to pretty much has a different predominant race. Overall, it is majority Hispanic population. So you don't really, I couldn't really notice. I mean, from my perspective, I didn't notice any racism. Nothing really ever stood out to me. I guess you did see some gaps in wealth in certain areas. Like, if you picked a direction and you kept going in it, the farther away you got from kind of like, I don't know, like, from like, so like the San Fernando Valley is in the Los Angeles area, and it's separated from the main LA basin by like a mountain range. And basically the farther you get away generally from like the LA basin, the more Hispanic the population seems to get. And you do notice that in more predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods, there is more poverty for sure. Like in the Northeast Valley, like in Silmar and in Pacoima and like kind of in San Fernando City, like you do notice more poverty than if you're in like the Southwest Valley, if you're in Woodland Hills or Calabasas. Like there is a huge wealth gap. I don't know enough about the history to
I
comment on
agree,
it.
definitely. Even here, when driving from like Santa Cruz and to Watsonville, Capitola, in like more Hispanic areas, you definitely can see right away, just like passing by, like the quality of life looks like lower. The houses don't look as nice. Area's a little bit dirtier. Do you guys have like any like maybe ideas of why is that so?
Well, I know, I remember when reading like I think it was The Grapes of Wrath in high school. I think in that the family moved to San Fernando, and historically it was a town started by underprivileged Hispanic immigrants, a lot of them from Mexico, and from the get-go subject to like poor labor laws, bad jobs, and like they worked hard, they kept their heads up, they still do, but there wasn't an equal level playing field from the beginning a long time ago.
I think it really goes back to the founding of this state in 1850, because prior to U.S. the occupation of the land, it belonged to Mexico, and it was a colony of Mexico until 1821. And many of the big towns we know today were founded during that time, and certainly a lot of the infrastructure and road systems we use date back to that time, and there was a massive population here that until 1850 considered themselves Mexican, but then with the gold rush and other natural resources in the area, the U.S. kind of took over, and these first-class citizens of Mexico were suddenly like second and third-class citizens, and they were, the Mexican citizens as well as like the indigenous people were like pushed into certain pockets of land, either by like force or because economically there was more money for them in certain sectors like agriculture and stuff. So the zoning in California was kind of sorted out that way.
I have a question that I want to pose. Do you guys think racism has always been a thing? Where do you think the origin lies with racism? And, answer that first.
No, it's definitely always been like a thing since the early human civilization.
I think it's almost natural to think people are different, especially if they look different. But you can obviously not classify an entire group of people based off of like actions or of one person in that group, and that's like the definition of racism.
It seems just to be almost. I don't necessarily want to say human nature because
I think it is human.
I think primates and Homo sapiens are generally pretty tribal in their cultures. Like
but
dating back to the earliest cultures, they would have been tribes of people
It's for survival.
Yeah,
you're gonna
but-
survive better if you're with a tribe, and you stick with your tribe, and you don't like the other tribes because other tribes could mean danger.
Pointing out differences dehumanizes people and it makes it easier. Yeah.
Yeah, but definitely like throughout all of like human like civilizations, there's always been even like,
The
it's
us versus them
the
mentality.
us
kinda.
and them. Who's part of us and who remains them. You know.
And then, interestingly, in the 19th century, racism took on a more pseudo-scientific angle with Darwinism's theories and how scientists back then used to believe that there is some subspecies of humans that are lower than other subspecies, and that it just supports with like survival of the fittest and everything, and different adaptations of humans. But now we know that's obviously not true, and I think that still a lot of that fake science we all made up is still very relevant today, and some people still believe in that.
I think a lot of that science is based off
Pseudoscience.
A lot of that pseudoscience is based off kind of like ideas that were completely constructed by us. Like with race, obviously different groups of DNA have created people that look different over time, different regions in the world. But classifying people is an idea of language and society. So in some ways we created it the way it is now. Obviously our actions have kind of dictated what is now, but I do still think like how could have it been avoided, like what the world we live in now. Like no matter what area in the world you go to, there is racism. Like people have prejudice. There are certain groups of people that are less well off than other groups of people, and they're discriminated against. But like, how does it fix? Like, what? I guess the next question that we're merging into is, what can we collectively do to address the issue?
Well, I think being vocal about it, and definitely like education helps. Like if you educate people and you teach them where all of these racist thoughts came from and ideas, and then education helps to a regard, but it's just people aren't born with prejudice. It's something you learn through your parents or through your environment, and to sort of address that would be for everyone to acknowledge that they are prejudiced and to actively work towards not being prejudiced.
Well, especially in modern times, I mean, after the 2008 election, people thought they would be looking at kind of a point in time where you've got the U.S. divided before 2008 as a pre-racial kind of line, and then everything past 2008 would be post-racism with the election of President Obama. But culturally, the shift hasn't been as dramatic. We do still see prejudice in all levels of society. That's obviously the point of this podcast. When will racism stop? Do you see a point in history? Can everybody look to a point in history?
I have another question to answer that question. Do you think racism has been going away, or have we been improving as a society against being racist at all? Is anything we're doing working?
The U.S.
Are we less racist than we were before?
I don't know. The U.S. was very bluntly racist in the past, with laws explicitly applying to different races.
Well, there used to be slavery.
Yeah, yes, of course.
Peak racism.
But I feel we still obviously have systemic racism in the legislation of this country. but it's just less transparent. Like, these boundaries are in place for those different races, and
But
Do you think that we should help them and make it a more level playing ground?
but how would we do that then? Like, I guess the government's tried. I mean,
Political policies
been, like,
that would
affirmative
help.
actions
That
and
would
stuff.
help the people the minorities being
there's been
oppressed.
like free reduced lunch. Like, I guess those programs like
it's just social programs that target the unfortunate, because with racism, it's all about the distinction of races. And if we are looking to do all these affirmative action bills, it would just be pointing out the differences. I mean, if you want to homogenize society, you should come up with social benefits that really help everybody, and try and downplay the advantages of the natural
Yes, I agree. We need to stop pointing out differences and kind of reasons to separate people, and instead just work for a greater good by helping everyone. Like, when we specifically target different groups, that's literally what we're doing. For the good or bad, we're segregating people. And it definitely puts an effect in our society of differences between different groups of people. And in no way I see that as good. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
should we move on to the one about UCSC?
Yeah. Do you guys see racism at school here in Santa Cruz? And like, how does here compare to home or anywhere else you've been?
This school's pretty diverse. As in, I don't see a lot of racist actions being committed every day, but at the same time, you can't see what people are thinking about. You know, people could still very well be thinking prejudiced ideas and thoughts, but overall, I think we're a pretty equal campus.
Well, the fact that it's a really liberal campus kind of plays into that too. You know? People like, for the most part, people here are pretty liberal, so they play into like the, not necessarily dissent, but they're more like aware and like more like sensitive to these topics, rather than at home, like as I mentioned earlier, like being like, it's a predominantly like just almost like one race, just Hispanic. So like people are more like desensitized to other things, and like they're more prone to make jokes about stuff that might like offend other people. Whereas here, I feel like people are more like conscious about what they're gonna say before anything.
I guess I'll comment about some of the other places I've been. In other parts of the world, there is more tension than the U.S., of course. I noticed this a lot in Israel. Like, it's kind of a misconception about Israel that, like, only Jews live there. There's a whole bunch of different groups of people. Lots of Christians, lots of Arab Christians, lots of Arab Muslims, lots of Jews. But there is some tension in some areas with them. And I noticed this specifically one night at a bar. I saw some Arabs and some Jews getting mad at each other because a Jewish woman was with an Arab man, and an Arab man was with an Arab woman was with a Jewish man, and there was tension and almost fighting, and on both sides they felt so different because of all their past and I guess current fights and just like beef, I guess. Like, so little things around there, just like, I guess like every time there is a step in a direction of homogenizing the groups around there, everyone has a problem with it because deep down there is just so much hate there. And I think as a country, like here in the U.S., we do have an opportunity to improve, because I think that hatred in general is starting, like the level of hatred is starting to get better in America. But I at least in California, I mean, California is a pretty progressive place, but there is certainly a lot less tension between different groups of people than 150 years ago. But like in other parts of the world right now, there is so much, and it's like you feel it everywhere you go. And I guess that's it. I'm not saying it's better here, but it's certainly less transparent, and I think we can solve it. I don't know how, but like, so could you guys? Well, I guess I'll transition into the next question. Could you guys imagine a world or our country without racism?
It's like a utopia.
You think it's a utopia?
I think.
Because a lot of people believe utopias can never be achieved. So
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think a world without racism will ever be achieved.
Yeah, I don't
think-
see it happening.
There will always be discrimination. Like if it's not within color, it'll be like we'll go back to like status. Like that's what humans are. Like humans love putting someone down to feel better than themselves.
Well,
And if it's not a difference in skin color, there'll be other characteristics of populations that people will turn to. I mean, do people like to be enraged? Do people...
Well, I think one solution towards racism would be just an exposure to several different cultures. I think if you meet, like, for example, if you have a predetermined idea that black people are terrible people, just from, like, your parents say that they're bad people, but you meet a black person and they turn out to be, like, one of your greatest friends and they're just a normal person, that's a direct exposure to that. It breaks the fallacy of what your parents taught you, and race has nothing to determine your own personality. People are entirely unique, and classifying a whole group of people would be impossible and incorrect. So I think if you expose yourself to different cultures through like living in a diverse environment, you can be and you will be less racist. Yay! Go Kresge won, thank you.